Could the Romans have had their own version of the internet? It sounds like a wild idea after all. We picture the ancient world as one of chariots, scrolls, and stone tablets, not high-speed communication. But what if I told you the Romans built a network so advanced, so efficient, that it eerily mirrors the way our digital world operates today? Imagine a system where messages could travel hundreds of miles in a single day, where news spread faster than a galloping horse, and where the empire's leaders could coordinate across continents almost as seamlessly as we do with a click. That's not science fiction, it's the reality of Rome's communication web, a marvel of engineering and organization that might just make you rethink what ancient really means. Think about how the internet works, a vast, interconnected system designed to move information at lightning speed. Now, strip away the wires and servers and replace them with roads, relay stations, and couriers. That's essentially what the Romans created, a physical network so robust it functioned like a proto-internet for its time. Their highways stretched over 50,000 miles, linking every corner of the empire, while relay stations known as mutations and mansions acted like ancient data centers, refreshing horses and messengers to keep the flow of information uninterrupted. Messages could race from Britain to Egypt in days, not weeks. Emperors issued decrees that reached distant provinces almost as quickly as a modern email. It wasn't just about speed, though it was about scale, precision, and the sheer ambition to bind an empire together through the power of communication. So did the Romans have an ancient internet? Not in the way we'd recognize today, but their system was arguably just as revolutionary for its time. This video isn't just about roads and messengers, it's about uncovering the hidden genius of a civilization that understood the value of connection long before the digital age. We'll explore how their networks operated, who kept them running, and why this system might be closer to our modern internet than you'd ever guess. Along the way, you'll see how Rome's mastery of information flow shaped history, and maybe even discover parallels that make you look at your Wi-Fi router in a whole new light. Ready to dive into one of history's most fascinating mysteries? Let's unravel the truth behind Rome's incredible communication web and decide for ourselves, was this the ancient world's first glimpse of the internet? At its core, the internet isn't just about fiber optic cables or glowing screens. It's a system built on three key pillars: moving information quickly, connecting distant points, and allowing data to flow freely between them. Take away the smartphones and satellites, and you're left with a simple truth: the internet is just a highly efficient way to share knowledge across vast distances. So if we're asking whether the Romans had something similar, we need to look beyond gadgets and focus on function. Picture how information travels today. A tweet zips from Tokyo to Toronto in seconds, or a video call bridges continents instantly. The Romans didn't have electricity, but they grasped the same fundamental need: to collapse time and space. Their version of data transmission relied on papyrus scrolls and wax tablets carried by couriers racing down stone-paved highways. And just like modern packets of data hopping between servers, these messages leaped from one relay station to the next, refreshed by fresh horses or new riders at each stop. The backbone of their system wasn't made of code, but of cobblestones, 50,000 miles of meticulously engineered roads acting like the empire's broadband cables. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Modern networks rely on protocols, rules that ensure data arrives intact. The Romans had their own version. Official dispatches bore seals to prevent tampering, while military reports used standardized formats for clarity. There were even priority tiers. Imperial decrees rushed ahead like VIP traffic on a digital network, while routine tax updates moved slower, just like low-priority background downloads today. And much like how we have firewalls and encryption, Roman messengers employed codes and trusted agents to secure sensitive information. The real genius, though, was in the nodes, those critical waypoints where messages changed hands. Think of Rome's mutations as the ancient equivalent of internet routers, small hubs where couriers swapped exhausted horses for fresh ones, keeping the system's momentum alive. Larger mansions functioned like data centers, offering rest, repairs, and even bureaucratic oversight to keep the network humming. This wasn't just a postal service, it was a tightly coordinated infrastructure designed to sustain the flow of information at empire-wide scale. So when we strip away the modern jargon, the parallels are startling. Both systems were built to solve the same problem: how to shrink a vast world into something manageable, how to make distant frontiers feel like they're just next door. The Romans didn't need silicon chips to create a network that bound their civilization together. They used what they had: stone, sweat, and staggering ambition, to build something that, in its own way, was just as revolutionary as the internet. The real question isn't whether they had an internet, but whether we've simply reinvented what they already perfected, cutting through mountains, spanning rivers, and stitching together an empire that stretched from the rainy hills of Britain to the sun-baked sands of Egypt. Roman roads were the arteries of antiquity. These weren't just dirt paths or muddy trails, they were feats of engineering so precise, so enduring, that some are still in use today. Take the Via Appia, the legendary Queen of Roads, begun in 312 BCE. Stretching over 300 miles from Rome to the port city of Brindisi, it was the empire's information superhighway, paved with volcanic stone so meticulously fitted that the joints were nearly seamless. Imagine a courier sprinting down this road, his sandals slapping against stones laid centuries before, every stride made effortless by a surface purpose built for speed. But what made these roads revolutionary wasn't just their durability, it was their design. Roman engineers didn't simply lay stones, they sculpted the landscape. Swamps were drained, hillsides terraced, and bridges arched over rivers with mathematical precision. The roads cambered slightly upward at the center, allowing rainwater to drain into gutters, preventing erosion and keeping the surface intact for heavy use. And they weren't built haphazardly. These were straight as arrows wherever terrain allowed, minimizing distance and maximizing efficiency. A messenger could cover 50 miles in a single day, unthinkable on the winding, uneven paths of pre-Roman Europe. The real magic, though, lay in the network's ubiquity. Like today's internet infrastructure, Roman roads formed a web where every node mattered. Major routes like the Via Augusta in Hispania or the Via Egnatia threading through the Balkans didn't just connect cities, they synchronized an empire. Troops marched on them, traders hauled goods along them, and critically, imperial couriers raced down them with scrolls stamped by the emperor himself. This wasn't just transportation, it was a logistical ballet where distance collapsed under the rhythm of relay stations and standardized milestones. Speaking of milestones, those humble stone markers were the empire's way of pinging its own network. Etched with distances to the nearest town, they functioned like ancient GPS coordinates, ensuring no traveler, whether a soldier or a tax collector, ever doubted their place in the system. And just as modern fiber optic lines follow the paths of old telegraph routes, many of today's European highways trace the ghostly outlines of Roman roads, a testament to their undying logic. So when we marvel at the internet's ability to connect the globe in seconds, it's worth remembering the Romans did something eerily similar, just at the speed of a galloping horse. Their roads weren't merely pavement, they were the physical manifestation of an idea as radical then as the internet was in our time. That distance should never be an obstacle to power, to knowledge, or to control. The next time you tap your phone and watch data fly across continents in a blink, spare a thought for the couriers who once raced down the Via Appia, their scrolls carrying the whispers of an empire that, much like us, refused to be limited by geography. The Cursus Publicus wasn't just Rome's postal service, it was the beating heart of imperial control. a government-operated courier network so efficient it would make modern logistics companies nod in respect. Imagine a system where urgent dispatches could shoot from the banks of the Rhine to the shores of the Nile in under a week, all without a single watt of electricity. This wasn't about delivering birthday scrolls or shopping lists. It was the empire's lifeline, a high-speed channel reserved exclusively for military orders, tax records, and the emperor's decrees. At its peak, the Cursus Publicus functioned like a cross between a courier app and a military operation. Relay stations spaced roughly every 10 miles along major roads acted as ancient pit stops, where exhausted riders could swap mounts or hand off messages to fresh couriers mid-stride. These weren't sleepy rest areas, they were precision hubs stocked with fast horses, backup carriages, and even repair crews for damaged wagons. The smaller mutations handled quick horse swaps, while larger mansions offered food, lodging, and bureaucratic staff to log shipments akin to modern sorting facilities with a side of roadside hospitality. Speed was the obsession. Official couriers bearing the emperor's seal could demand priority treatment, bypassing slower traffic like a modem routing critical data packets ahead of routine downloads. Historical accounts suggest some high-priority messages clocked speeds of 50 miles a day, unheard of in a world where most travelers were lucky to cover half that distance. For context, a dispatch from Rome could reach the rebellious frontiers of Britannia in about a week, outpacing even the fastest merchant ships, yet this system had its limits. Unlike today's internet, which floods billions of devices with cat videos and tax forms alike, the Cursus Publicus served only the state. Private citizens couldn't book a courier to send love letters or wine orders. Attempting to hijack the service illegally could mean exile or worse. And while it excelled at moving lightweight scrolls, bulk goods still relied on sluggish ox carts. The true innovation wasn't brute force speed, but the empire's ability to create a dedicated, interference-free channel for critical information, something modern IT departments might envy when their video calls buffer. What's striking is how the system mirrored digital protocols. Just as today's networks use encryption to protect data, Roman couriers employed wax-sealed tablets and trusted agents to thwart spies. And much like how cloud servers replicate files across backups, important imperial decrees were often carried by multiple couriers simultaneously, redundancy in case of bandits or bad weather. The Cursus Publicus wasn't perfect. Corruption occasionally slowed it like a glitchy router, and its costs drained provincial budgets. But for nearly 5 centuries, it proved something revolutionary, that even without wires or code, humans could engineer a system to make an empire feel small. Next time you grumble about 2-day shipping, remember the Roman courier who'd have laughed at your impatience. His horse already saddled for another sprint down the Via Augusta. Julius Caesar once boasted that messages from the battlefields of Gaul could reach Rome in just 9 days, a claim that would have left his predecessors slack-jawed with disbelief. Before the Romans paved their highways, most ancient empires moved information at the speed of a tired donkey. The Persians had their royal road, sure, but it was a single thread compared to Rome's sprawling web. A letter from Athens to Sparta in the 5th century BCE might take weeks winding through mountain passes and coastal detours. Now imagine Caesar's courier hurtling down the Via Domitia, swapping horses at every mutatio, his pouch of dispatches outstripping the pace of history itself. This wasn't just incremental improvement, it was a paradigm shift. Pre-Roman messengers battled terrain and time, Egyptian envoys navigating Nile floods, Greek heralds waiting for fair winds to carry word between islands. Rome's system turned communication into a predictable science. Milestones counted down the distance, while relay stations functioned like clockwork. The result: urgent news could cross the empire faster than a storm front. When Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii in 79 CE, Emperor Titus likely knew within 48 hours. His couriers racing 300 miles to Rome on roads so straight they'd make a surveyor weep. The secret lay in standardization. Every mancio kept horses ready, every road avoided unnecessary curves. Compare that to medieval Europe, where a message from London to Canterbury might meander for days through muddy tracks. Rome's network was the ancient equivalent of upgrading from dial-up to fiber optics. Even their rivals admitted it. The Greek historian Polybius marveled at how a well-trained Roman courier could cover 60 miles in a day, triple the average for most ancient travelers. Yet speed alone wasn't the true revolution. It was consistency. For the first time, a general in Germania or a governor in Syria could trust that their reports would reach the capital not eventually, but on a schedule as reliable as the tide. This predictability let Rome administer an empire spanning 3 continents. Tax records arrived on time, rebellions were squashed before they spread, and emperors ruled with an omniscience that bordered on psychic. The roads didn't just carry messages, they carried the illusion of proximity, making Rome feel present in every province simultaneously. So when we marvel at Caesar's 9-day Gaul to Rome sprint, we're not just counting miles. We're witnessing the birth of real-time governance, a system so advanced it would take humanity another 1,500 years to surpass it. The next time your video call lags, spare a thought for those sweat-drenched couriers. Their hoofbeats were the sound of an empire thinking faster than the world around it. While the Cursus Publicus kept Rome's bureaucracy humming, the military needed something even faster, a way to send urgent warnings across vast frontiers faster than any horse could gallop. Enter optical telegraphy, the empire's high-speed alert system. Picture a Roman centurion standing atop a windswept British hill fort, his polished bronze shield catching the midday sun. With a deliberate flick, he angles it toward the next fort along Hadrian's Wall. Seconds later, another flash answers not random glints but a precise sequence. A coded message has just traveled miles in the time it takes to draw a breath. This wasn't improvisation, it was a meticulously engineered network of light and fire. Along Rome's borders, watchtowers stood within clear sight of one another, each manned by soldiers trained to interpret and relay signals. Simple messages like "raiders approaching" could be sent via smoke columns by day or fire beacons by night. More complex communications used shields or mirrors to flash coded sunlight in patterns, a system remarkably similar to Morse code centuries before electricity. The historian Polybius even describes a sophisticated cipher system where letters were divided into grids, allowing towers to transmit everything from troop movements to supply requests without a single spoken word. The real genius lay in the system's adaptability. In dense forests like Germania, where smoke might disperse among trees, towers were built taller. Desert outposts used polished metal mirrors to bounce signals over shimmering heat haze. And just like modern networks prioritize emergency alerts, Rome's optical telegraphy had protocols. A single torch might indicate routine status updates, while 3 successive fires meant imminent invasion, triggering instant mobilization across entire provinces. When Boudicca's rebellion erupted in Britain in 61 CE, historians believe it was these fiery signals that allowed Roman forces to coordinate their brutal counterattack with terrifying speed. But speed came with limits. Unlike the Cursus Publicus, which could carry detailed scrolls, optical telegraphy traded depth for immediacy. A beacon could scream "enemy sighted," but not their numbers or weapons. To compensate, the military developed standardized signal codes, different smoke colors for different threats, or mirror flashes counting enemy formations. Some frontier forts even kept pre-written scrolls with common messages, ready to launch via carrier pigeon if beacons demanded elaboration. What's striking is how these ancient techniques echo modern cybersecurity principles. Just as we use encryption to protect data, Roman signalers employed shared ciphers known only to their units. And much like how today's networks have backup servers, redundant beacons ensured a message could reroute if one tower fell to attackers. This wasn't crude improvisation, it was a masterclass in resilient communication design. So next time you send a text and watch those little ticks turn blue, remember the sentry on Hadrian's wall, his firebrand raised against the twilight. 2,000 years separate your phone from his torch, but the goal remains identical: to make the vast and dangerous world feel just a little smaller, a little safer with every flicker of connection. While Rome's land-based networks dazzle, their mastery of the sea reveals an equally sophisticated system, one where fluttering flags and flickering lanterns turned scattered ships into a synchronized fleet. Picture a Roman trireme cutting through Mediterranean waves, its mast bristling with colored banners. To the untrained eye, it's mere decoration, but to a naval commander, those patterns are as precise as modern radio chatter, conveying orders across miles of open water without a single shout. The Romans didn't invent naval signaling, but they perfected it with military precision. During battles, flags functioned like an ancient version of packet switching, each combination encoding specific maneuvers. A red pennant might signal "form battle line," while a striped blue and yellow banner ordered oarsmen to sprint speed. At night, lanterns replaced fabric, their positions on the mast indicating course changes or enemy sightings. The historian Vegetius describes how fleets could execute complex formations, wheeling, flanking, or retreating purely through these silent cues, much like modern ships using semaphore or signal lamps. What's remarkable is how these methods mirror today's maritime protocols. Modern navies still use flag hoists for certain commands, a direct legacy of Roman ingenuity. Even the International Code of Signals, developed in the 19th century, operates on the same principle: visual symbols transmitting standardized messages. The Romans just worked with fewer pixels. Their data packets were dyed wool instead of encrypted radio waves, but the real brilliance lay in redundancy. Fog or battle smoke could obscure flags, so ships carried backup methods: drumbeats for close quarters, smoke signals for over-the-horizon coordination. Some accounts suggest they even used polished shields to flash sunlight between vessels, creating an ad hoc optical network when visibility allowed. This layered approach, flags for routine orders, lights for night ops, mirrors for emergencies, showcases the same adaptive thinking that keeps modern militaries connected despite jammed frequencies or hacked systems. Consider the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian's fleet outmaneuvered Antony and Cleopatra's larger force. Historians argue his victory hinged partly on superior signaling: smaller, nimbler ships responding instantly to flag commands while Antony's fleet struggled with miscommunication. It's a scenario straight out of modern naval warfare, where network superiority often trumps sheer firepower. So next time you see a cargo ship's signal flags flapping in the breeze, remember, you're witnessing a 2,000-year-old language of the sea, one the Romans wrote in bold, colorful strokes. Their fleets may have sailed without satellites, but their ability to think as a single organism across watery distances proves that connectivity isn't just about technology, it's about imagination. If the Cursus Publicus was Rome's high-speed data pipeline, then the Acta Diurna was its social media feed, a daily dose of decrees, scandals, and imperial gossip plastered across the city's busiest squares. Carved into white and wooden tablets or etched onto metal sheets, these handwritten bulletins were the ancient world's closest thing to a newspaper, updating citizens on everything from Senate decisions to gladiator match results. Imagine walking through the Roman Forum in the 1st century BCE, elbowing past merchants and senators to squint at the latest update. Emperor Augustus approves new aqueduct project. Senator's wife caught in affair with a charioteer. Grain shipment delayed by storms off Sicily. Sound familiar? It should. 2,000 years before trending topics and viral tweets, Rome had already cracked the code of mass information addiction. The Acta Diurna, literally daily acts, weren't just idle entertainment. They were a calculated tool of governance, Julius Caesar formalized their publication around 59 BCE, transforming what had been sporadic announcements into a systematic record. Scribes transcribed Senate debates, court rulings, and even birth announcements, posting copies on the album, a whitewashed board in the forum, and distributing them to provinces via the Cursus Publicus. This wasn't just news, it was statecraft in real time, a way to unify diverse territories under a shared narrative. Provincial governors thousands of miles from Rome could read the Acta and adjust their policies to match the capital's whims, an ancient precursor to modern press releases shaping global markets. But let's not sanitize history. The Acta thrived on drama as much as diplomacy. Gladiator results drew bigger crowds than tax reforms, and juicy scandals, like Emperor Nero's alleged affair with a slave boy, spread faster than plague rats. Wealthy patrons even hired private scribes to hand copy bulletins for their villas, creating an early version of subscription news. And just like today's tabloids, the Acta sometimes blurred fact and rumor. When a fire devastated Rome in 64 CE, Nero's enemies used the bulletins to imply his guilt, sparking whispers that he'd fiddled while the city burned, a smear campaign that outlasted the emperor himself. The true legacy of the Acta Diurna, though, lies in its democratization of information. For the first time in history, a street vendor could stand beside a senator and absorb the same updates. No literacy, no problem. Public readers, Proto podcasters, would recite bulletins aloud for crowds, turning news into a communal experience. This wasn't just a bulletin board, it was a cultural leveler, proving that access to information could be as powerful as the information itself. So the next time you refresh your news app or doom scroll through headlines, remember, the Romans were there first. Their Acta may have been written in ink instead of pixels, but the game hasn't changed. Then as now, information was currency, spectacle, and control, all wrapped in a package just tantalizing enough to keep everyone coming back for more. Beyond roads and couriers, Rome's thirst for knowledge demanded something even more enduring: libraries. These weren't just quiet halls of scrolls, they were the empire's intellectual data centers where ideas were copied, catalogued, and dispatched to distant provinces like software updates. The grandest of them all, the Library of Alexandria, wasn't merely a storehouse, it was an ancient algorithm for preserving knowledge. Every ship docking in Alexandria's harbor faced a peculiar demand. Any scrolls aboard had to be surrendered for copying. Scribes would feverishly duplicate texts, returning the originals to their owners while keeping a copy for the library's sprawling collection. This wasn't just bureaucracy. It was the ancient world's most aggressive knowledge harvesting operation, amassing an estimated 500,000 scrolls at its peak. But Rome didn't stop at hoarding wisdom, they industrialized its spread. Private scriptoria, often staffed by enslaved scholars, became the empire's content farms. Rows of scribes hunched over papyrus, replicating everything from Virgil's poetry to manuals on aqueduct engineering. Finished scrolls traveled via the same roads that carried military dispatches, turning provincial libraries from Britain to Syria into mirrors of Rome's intellectual core. Imagine a 2nd century governor in distant Londinium unrolling a freshly delivered scroll, its contents identical to one being read that same week in a senator's villa outside Naples. This wasn't just literacy, it was mass synchronization of thought across continents. The system had its quirks. Without standardized spelling, copies accumulated errors like a centuries-long game of telephone. Pliny the Elder complained about scribes introducing monstrous corruptions into texts, while wealthy bibliophiles paid premium prices for scrolls copied by renowned scriptoria, the ancient equivalent of buying verified content from a trusted publisher. Yet for all its flaws, this network achieved something extraordinary. It made knowledge borderless. A medical treatise penned in Greek could reach a Gaulish physician, while a Carthaginian agronomist's farming tips might end up guiding olive harvests in Dalmatia. What's often overlooked is how these libraries functioned as early search engines. Scrolls were organized by subject with annotated indexes helping scholars navigate collections, a primitive form of metadata. The poet Marshall even joked about a particular scroll's location being as hard to find as a needle in a Tiber flood, proving that research struggles are timeless. And just like modern digital archives faced with obsolescence, Roman librarians fought their own format wars: papyrus versus parchment, scroll versus early codex, each transition reshaping how information was stored and shared. The real legacy of Rome's library network lies in its democratization of expertise. While the elite might own private collections, public libraries allowed even modest citizens access to legal texts, philosophy, or epic poetry. This wasn't just about preserving the past, it was about wiring the empire's collective brain, ensuring that breakthroughs in one corner could enlighten the whole. When Hadrian built Athens' monumental library of Pantanos in the 2nd century CE, complete with rules banning scroll theft, he wasn't just storing books, he was safeguarding the operating system of civilization itself. So the next time you download an e-book or skim a digital article, remember the scribes of Alexandria, their ink-stained fingers racing to duplicate another scroll. Their work and Rome's relentless system for spreading it proved that information, once set free, could outpace even the swiftest courier. The internet didn't invent the global village, it just gave us a faster way to rebuild what the Romans first achieved with papyrus, patience, and sheer imperial will. While the Cursus Publicus served as Rome's official information highway, a bustling shadow network thrived just beneath its surface, one fueled not by imperial decree but by private ambition. Enter the tabularii, the freelance couriers of antiquity who wove their own threads across the empire's communication web. Picture a merchant in bustling Ostia, sealing a wax tablet with details of a lucrative olive oil shipment bound for Gaul. Handing it to a sun-leathered tabularius, he pays not with taxes, but with silver coins, because in Rome's competitive economy, business couldn't wait for the bureaucracy's pace. These private messengers operated like an ancient gig economy. Wealthy patricians maintained their own courier teams, while enterprising freedmen offered pay-per-scroll services to anyone who could afford them. Unlike the Cursus Publicus, which prioritized state business, the tabularii catered to commerce and personal connections. A wine exporter in Hispania could receive daily updates from his agents in Rome. A senator's wife might send gossip-laden letters to her sister in Alexandria. Even bankers relied on them to shuttle loan contracts and debt reminders, proof that where official channels lagged, capitalism filled the gap. What's fascinating is how this mirrored modern parallel networks. Just as today's encrypted apps sometimes skirt government surveillance, Rome's tabularii often bypassed official scrutiny. Some operated openly, while others disguised messages in hollow staffs or sewn into cloaks, especially if they carried politically sensitive gossip. The poet Marshall grumbled about how quickly his verses criticizing the emperor spread via these private channels, proving that viral content existed long before hashtag. But speed came at a cost. Without the Cursus Publicus's infrastructure, private couriers faced bandits, storms, and breakdowns. Wealthy clients mitigated risks by sending multiple copies of critical messages via different routes, a crude form of packet switching. Others hired retired legionaries as bodyguard couriers, their military training ensuring safe passage through rough terrain. The system was ad hoc, but it worked so well that during crises, even emperors quietly relied on these unofficial networks when the state's own messengers were overwhelmed. The tabularii reveal an uncomfortable truth about Rome's communication empire. For all its engineering marvels, the state couldn't monopolize information. Entrepreneurs, lovers, and schemers always found ways to talk faster, freer, and farther than the authorities could control. In that sense, these private couriers were the true ancestors of today's internet, not because of their technology, but because they proved that human ingenuity will always route around bureaucracy. While Rome's roads and beacons dominate the conversation, some ancient texts hint at an even more elusive communication tool: water-powered signaling. Picture a network of interconnected cisterns spread across hilltops, their carefully calibrated water levels acting as a primitive but ingenious telegraph system. The Greek historian Polybius describes a hydraulic telegraph used during the First Punic War in the 3rd century BCE, where senders and receivers synchronized identical water clocks with prearranged codes. As a torch signal marked the start, operators would drain their containers until a second torch signaled stop, the water level corresponding to a specific message carved on the vessel's interior. A message like "enemy fleet sighted" or "reinforcements needed" could leap across miles in minutes, faster than any horse or ship. But did Rome adopt this liquid Morse code? Evidence is scant but tantalizing. The empire's obsession with aqueducts proves they mastered large-scale hydraulic engineering, and military outposts along frontiers like the Rhine often featured elaborate water systems. Archaeologists have uncovered curious basins in some remote forts, too shallow for storage, yet precisely aligned with neighboring installations. Could these have been part of a fluid signaling network? It's speculative but not implausible. Water doesn't tire like a courier, and unlike smoke, it's visible day or night. For isolated garrisons, a system relying on gravity and volume might have been more reliable than riders braving snowy mountain passes. The real stroke of genius: immunity to interception. While a captured courier could betray his message, a hydraulic signal left no physical trace once the water drained. And unlike fire beacons, which screamed "attention" to friend and foe alike, these liquid signals could operate discreetly. Modern experiments recreating Polybius's system show it could transmit hundreds of prearranged phrases with surprising accuracy, an ancient precursor to encrypted messaging. Of course, water telegraphs had limits. They required meticulous calibration and couldn't convey spontaneous updates. But in a world where most communication moved at biological speeds, the pace of a horse's gallop or a sailor's oar strokes, even a trickle of instant intelligence could tilt battles. When Hannibal's elephants crossed the Alps or Boudicca's rebels torched Londinium, commanders might have traded gold for a few early hours of warning. Hydraulic signaling may never have matched Rome's road networks in scale, but as a niche tool for critical moments, it could have been the empire's forgotten hotline whispering secrets through the very veins of its infrastructure. So next time you turn on a faucet, consider this: 2 millennia ago, that same element might have carried urgent words across silent valleys, proving once again that Rome's genius wasn't just in stone and sweat, but in bending nature itself to the will of information. Every olive shipped from Hispania, every amphora of wine traded in Syria, every sack of grain taxed in Egypt, Rome's economy ran on paper trails as much as silver coins. But with an empire spanning 3 continents, how did officials in distant provinces stay synchronized with Rome's ever-shifting ledgers? The answer lies in a meticulously documented system of trade receipts, tax rolls, and market reports that functioned like an ancient spreadsheet, updating in near real time thanks to the empire's relentless courier network. Consider the Portoria customs records from bustling trade hubs like Ostia or Alexandria. Every merchant unloading cargo faced scribes noting quantities, origins, and duties owed on wax tablets or papyrus scrolls. These weren't just local records. Duplicates raced inland via the Cursus Publicus, allowing Rome's treasury to track revenue streams from Britannia to Mesopotamia. A customs agent in Carthage could reference last month's Egyptian linen imports with startling precision, while tax assessors in Gaul adjusted their quotas based on updated olive oil prices from southern Hispania. This wasn't merely bureaucracy, it was macroeconomic management on a scale unmatched until the digital age. Market prices followed the same high-speed channels. The Annona, Rome's state-run grain dole, required constant updates on harvest yields and regional shortages. When drought struck North Africa, officials in Rome knew within days to reroute shipments from Sicily, preventing bread riots in the capital. Provincial governors received monthly bulletins with commodity price averages, ancient investor reports allowing them to spot trends like rising Egyptian papyrus costs or fluctuating Spanish metal prices. Merchants paid handsomely for copies of these updates, proving that insider trading predates Wall Street by millennia. Tax collection took this data flow further. The Publicani, Rome's controversial tax contractors, operated with near-scientific precision. Census rolls detailing every province's population, land values, and livestock counts were continuously updated and disseminated. A vineyard owner in Campania couldn't hide his expanded acreage from assessors. The updated records would arrive with the next courier. And just like modern audits, discrepancies triggered investigations. Josephus recounts how Syrian census takers in the 1st century CE cross-checked their figures against archived returns from decades prior, creating a paper trail even the wealthiest landlords struggled to falsify. What's striking is how this system anticipated modern supply chain logistics. Bills of lading traveled with goods, while warehouse inventories in Ostia mirrored those in Antioch through synchronized record-keeping. When Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii's bustling fish sauce trade in 79 CE, merchants in Spain and Gaul adjusted their orders within weeks, not because they'd seen the ash cloud, but because the Cursus Publicus delivered updated production tallies. Rome's economic web had its glitches, of course. Corruption occasionally distorted data, like a misconfigured algorithm, and natural delays meant some reports arrived outdated. But for its time, it achieved something extraordinary, an empire that could react to financial tremors almost as quickly as we track stock dips today. The next time you check a shipping update or refresh a crypto price, remember the scribes of Ostia, their ink-stained fingers keeping the world's first global economy humming, one papyrus scroll at a time. Latin wasn't just the language of poets and philosophers, it was the empire's operating system, a linguistic protocol that standardized communication across millions of people who'd never set foot in Rome. Imagine a tax collector in Britannia writing his reports in Latin, a merchant in Carthage drafting contracts with the same vocabulary, and a soldier on the Euphrates reading military orders phrased identically to those posted in the forum. This wasn't coincidence, it was deliberate design. Like the TCP/IP protocols that let your phone talk to servers halfway across the world, Latin gave the ancient world a shared syntax for everything from grain shipments to imperial decrees. The genius lay in its rigidity. Unlike modern languages that evolve organically, Rome's Latin was meticulously codified. Grammatical rules were enforced with near religious zeal, especially in official documents. A property deed in Gaul followed the same formulaic structure as one in Egypt, down to the placement of seals and witnesses. This consistency turned language into a frictionless pipeline. A governor in Syria could read a dispatch from Hispania without pausing to decipher regional quirks or slang. Even pronunciation was standardized among elites, creating an ancient equivalent of network compatibility. When Pliny the Younger wrote letters to Trajan about Bithynia's sewer repairs, he used the same technical terms employed by engineers in Rome itself. But Latin's real power was as a cultural carrier wave. Just as HTML embeds images and videos within web pages, Latin transmitted Roman identity alongside raw information. Inscriptions on milestones didn't just state distances, they proclaimed imperial dominance with phrases like, "Augustus restored this road." Army recruits from Germania learned drill commands in Latin while absorbing Roman values through the very grammar that structured their orders. Even Rome's enemies adopted it. The Germanic chieftain Arminius, who famously destroyed 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest, was fluent enough to exploit Roman military jargon during his ambush. The parallels with digital protocols run deep. Modern systems use checksums to verify data integrity, Roman scribes employed acrostics and repetitive phrasing to prevent tampering. Important texts often began with stock phrases like "let it be known," acting as ancient packet headers, while legal documents included redundant copies, a primitive form of error correction. And much like how today's internet prioritizes certain data packets, Latin itself had built-in hierarchies: Classical Latin for state business, Vulgar Latin for trade, and Greek retaining prestige for philosophy. This layered approach allowed the system to scale across wildly different literacy levels and social strata. Yet no system is perfect. Latin's rigidity eventually became its Achilles heel. As the empire expanded, regional dialects diverged like incompatible software forks, Vulgar Latin morphing into early French, Spanish, and Italian. Some provinces clung to local languages for everyday use, much how modern programmers might use Python for one task and Java for another. By the 5th century CE, Augustine complained that rural North African priests barely understood their own Latin liturgy, a communication breakdown not unlike legacy systems struggling to pass modern code. The true testament to Latin's protocol-like efficiency, it outlasted the empire itself. Medieval monks still copied Cicero 1,000 years after Rome fell, and Renaissance scholars treated classical Latin like a perfect API, a stable interface for rediscovering ancient knowledge. Today, when a doctor writes a prescription in Latin abbreviations or a lawyer cites habeas corpus, they're unknowingly invoking the last flickers of history's most durable information standard. The internet didn't invent universal languages, it just gave us binary where Rome had declensions. The Roman Senate wasn't just a chamber of toga-clad politicians. It was the empire's central processing unit where debates rippled outward through speeches, dispatches, and decrees, shaping policy from Britannia to Babylon. Picture a typical morning in the Curia Julia, senators rising to deliver impassioned arguments about grain subsidies or frontier defenses, their words transcribed by scribes perched along the marble steps. But these speeches didn't vanish into the air. Within hours, summaries would race across the empire via the Cursus Publicus, reaching provincial governors who needed to align their actions with Rome's latest political winds. A single debate about tax reforms in the capital could trigger adjustments in Syrian market regulations or African land allocations within weeks, an ancient precedent for how modern legislation cascades through bureaucracies today. What made this system revolutionary was its feedback loops. Provincial officials didn't just receive orders, they sent back detailed reports on local conditions, which senators used to refine subsequent debates. Cicero's letters from Cilicia, for example, brim with complaints about corrupt tax collectors, reports that fueled Senate discussions and ultimately led to judicial reforms. This wasn't top-down rule, it was a dynamic exchange with information cycling between center and periphery like data packets across servers. Even ordinary citizens participated indirectly. Crowds gathered outside the Senate to hear news, while actuarii professional newswriters compiled gossipy bulletins that traders carried to every port city. The machinery of dissemination had its own hierarchy. Edicts from the emperor or consuls moved fastest, stamped with seals that guaranteed their authenticity. Senatorial decrees followed, often accompanied by explanatory letters to provincial administrators who'd translate broad policies into local action. Private correspondence among elites like Pliny the Younger's letters to Trajan functioned as a parallel diplomatic channel, bypassing formal protocols to address urgent issues. And just as modern politicians leaked to the press, Roman factions strategically circulated rumors to sway public opinion. When Tiberius withdrew to Capri, his opponents flooded the streets with handwritten pamphlets alleging his decadence, a smear campaign that would feel right at home on today's social media. Yet this system had vulnerabilities, distance-distorted messages. A nuanced debate in Rome might reach Gaul as a simplified directive, sparking unintended consequences. Corruption sometimes tampered with the signal governors, omitting unfavorable census data or delaying unpopular decrees. And unlike today's instant fact-checking, misinformation could fester for months before corrections arrived. Famously, a forged letter claiming Mark Antony planned to move Rome's capital to Alexandria circulated for weeks before being debunked, destabilizing his support. The true legacy of Rome's political network lies in its recognition that governance isn't just about decisions, it's about the speed and fidelity of their transmission. 2,000 years before digital democracy, senators understood that controlling the flow of information meant controlling the empire itself. Their scrolls and speeches built something startlingly modern, a world where ideas could cross continents faster than armies, where feedback shaped policy in real time, and where every whispered debate in the Curia echoed from the pyramids to the Rhine. Temples weren't just places of worship in ancient Rome. They were buzzing hubs of information where divine prophecies and imperial decrees spread through the footsteps of pilgrims and the murmur of festivals. Picture the majestic temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus towering over Rome's Capitoline Hill. Inside, priests didn't merely perform sacrifices, they curated announcements from the Senate, posted imperial edicts beside altars, and interpreted omens that shaped military campaigns. When an emperor wanted his latest triumph or tax reform etched into public consciousness, he didn't just rely on couriers. He leveraged the sacred spaces where crowds gathered daily, ensuring news traveled on the lips of the faithful. Oracles like Delphi or the Sibylline shrines in Italy took this further, functioning as ancient search engines for divine insight. A general about to march into battle might send envoys days ahead to seek Apollo's guidance, while a merchant planning a risky voyage could consult the oracle at Didyma for favorable winds. These prophecies weren't kept secret, they ricocheted across the empire through traders, soldiers, and pilgrims returning home. The Sibylline books, housed in Rome itself, were so pivotal that senators consulted them during crises, their cryptic verses sparking everything from new temple constructions to emergency grain shipments. In an age before newspapers, these sacred sites became amplifiers for both spiritual and political narratives, their authority giving weight to every whispered update. Imperial cult temples turbocharged this system. From Ephesus to Lyon, shrines dedicated to deified emperors doubled as propaganda centers. Festivals honoring Augustus or Trajan weren't just rituals, they were live-streamed loyalty tests where provincial elites competed to display allegiance through speeches and donations. News of these events, along with the emperor's latest titles or benefactions, spread through the attendees who then carried stories back to their hometowns. A decree from Rome might take weeks to reach a distant village via official channels, but a traveling priest celebrating the emperor's birthday could deliver the same message with theatrical flair, embedding it in local memory through song and sacrifice. Pilgrimages wove these threads into a cohesive web. Every year, thousands journeyed to healing sanctuaries like Asclepius's temple in Epidaurus, where the sick slept in dormitories awaiting divine dreams. While waiting, they exchanged gossip from across the Mediterranean, a soldier's tale of unrest in Germania, a senator's scandal overheard in Corinth. Like data packets bouncing between servers, these fragments of news hopped from shrine to shrine, carried by pilgrims whose routes crisscrossed the empire. Even small town festivals became information exchanges. At the annual Vulcanalia in Pompeii, farmers praying for protection from fires would inevitably share updates about bad harvests or highway bandits, creating an organic grassroots network that supplemented and sometimes outpaced official channels. The genius of Rome's religious networks lay in their dual purpose. A prophecy from Delphi might steer a general's strategy, but it also reinforced the idea that Rome's fate was divinely ordained. Imperial cult ceremonies didn't just spread news, they manufactured consensus, wrapping political messaging in sacred theater. And when crisis struck, a plague, a rebellion, temples became crisis command centers, coordinating relief efforts through their vast volunteer networks. Modern social media algorithms might seem light years ahead, but the goal remains strikingly similar: to bind a far-flung population together through shared narratives, ensuring that whether the medium was scripture or scroll, the message always found its audience. Spies moved through the Roman Empire like shadows, officially grain collectors, secretly the empire's eyes and ears. Meet the frumentarii, Rome's most feared intelligence operatives. On the surface, these men were simply military suppliers, tasked with securing wheat shipments for the legions. But their dull paperwork masked a darker purpose: to surveil, infiltrate, and eliminate threats long before they reached the Senate's marble floors. Stationed in every province, they monitored governors for corruption, tracked rebel murmurs in taverns, and intercepted letters bearing treasonous whispers. When Emperor Domitian suspected his own cousin plotted against him, it was the frumentarii who delivered the proof, and likely the execution order. Unlike the Cursus Publicus, which broadcasted Rome's power openly, the frumentarii thrived in the seams of the system. They traveled without fanfare, their plain tunics hiding coded messages sewn into linings or hollowed-out coins. Some posed as merchants, using trade routes to smuggle intelligence. Others infiltrated gladiator schools or foreign courts, playing long games of deception. Their methods anticipated modern spycraft: dead drops in temple offering boxes, clandestine meetings at public baths, even poison disguised as gifts. One account tells of a frumentarius in Antioch who posed as a Syrian astrologer for years, feeding false prophecies to Parthian diplomats until they abandoned a planned invasion. The real genius of their network was its deniability. Since their official role involved mundane logistics, provincial officials had to cooperate with them, unaware they were being assessed for loyalty. Taxes might arrive late if a governor displeased Rome's hidden watchers, while a generous bribe to a grain inspector could suddenly ease bureaucratic delays. Over time, their reputation grew so sinister that 3rd century emperors disbanded them, fearing even their own spies. Yet the need for covert intelligence never vanished. Their successors, the agents in rebus, simply inherited the shadows. What makes the frumentarii truly fascinating isn't just their tactics, but how they mirrored the dark underbelly of Rome's communication web. For every proud milestone proclaiming imperial unity, there were whispers in back alleys undermining it. Their existence proves that Rome didn't just build roads for messages, it built channels for secrets, understanding that real power often lies not in what's broadcasted, but in what's stolen, suppressed, or silently intercepted. In that sense, they weren't so different from today's hackers operating in the spaces between the official lines, where information becomes weapon, and trust is the rarest currency of all. Carrier pigeons weren't just medieval messengers, they were Rome's feathered emergency responders, darting across skies when roads were too slow or too dangerous. While the empire never institutionalized pigeon post on the scale of later Persian or Mongol systems, scattered evidence hints at their niche role in Rome's communication web. Take Pliny the Elder's account of besieged towns releasing doves with news scratched onto thin lead sheets, avian text messages fluttering over enemy lines. Or consider the wealthy merchant in Pompeii whose fresco depicts a pigeon loft, suggesting some civilians bred birds for private dispatches. These weren't systematized like the Cursus Publicus, but in crises where speed trumped secrecy, wings could outpace hooves. Yet pigeons faced stiff competition from an even more unlikely courier: bees. Yes, bees. The agriculturist Columella describes an eccentric but effective method where beekeepers tied dye-soaked threads to worker bees returning to their hives. Observers would note which colored threads appeared at distant apiaries, decoding simple messages like attack or retreat. It sounds fanciful, but the same principle later helped resistance fighters in World War I, proof that Rome's experimental spirit anticipated unconventional networks by millennia. Dogs, too, had their moment. Roman military outposts along the Danube reportedly used Molossian hounds, massive ancestors of modern mastiffs. to shuttle short-range alerts between watchtowers. Trainers exploited the dog's natural homing instinct, attaching bone cylinders with rolled messages to their collars. Unlike pigeons vulnerable to hawks, these canine couriers could fight off wolves or thieves, delivering their cargo through snow and darkness. The real stars of animal messaging, though, were Rome's maritime counterparts, dolphins. While never domesticated, coastal garrisons from Hispania to Syria observed that pods of dolphins often followed ships along predictable routes. Some commanders exploited this by tying waterproofed reed cases to friendly dolphins near besieged ports. Though only a handful of accounts survive, like one dubious tale of dolphins ferrying surrender terms during the Punic Wars, the very attempt reveals Roman ingenuity in leveraging nature's speed. What makes these animal networks fascinating isn't their reliability. They paled next to Rome's stone-paved infrastructure, but their adaptability. When floods washed out roads or pirates blockaded ports, the empire's messengers turned to whatever could bridge the gap: wings, paws, or even fins. In that sense, they were the ancient equivalent of mesh networks, decentralized, resilient, and proof that even the mightiest civilization sometimes relied on nature's engineers to keep the lines open. Vitruvius's De Architectura wasn't just a scroll gathering dust in some aristocrat's library, it was the empire's blueprint, a masterclass in engineering so comprehensive that it fueled construction projects from the damp highlands of Britannia to the sun-scorched deserts of Syria. Imagine a first-century engineer in distant Lusitania unrolling a copy of this 10-volume masterpiece, his fingers tracing diagrams of aqueducts, ballista designs, and even the perfect proportions for theater acoustics. These weren't trade secrets guarded by guilds. They were open-source knowledge, replicated and distributed with the same fervor as modern software documentation. Vitruvius himself wrote that architecture belonged not to individuals but to the public, a philosophy that turned his work into the ancient equivalent of a Creative Commons license. The brilliance of De Architectura lay in its accessibility. Written in clear, technical Latin with Greek terms translated for broader comprehension, it functioned as both textbook and field manual. Legionary engineers could reference its siege engine specifications, while civic planners applied its principles for laying out sewer systems. Provincial architects lacking formal training relied on its step-by-step guidance, from mixing volcanic ash into durable concrete to aligning streets with prevailing winds for natural ventilation. Like today's open-access wikis, the text evolved through use. Marginal notes in surviving copies show engineers adapting Vitruvius's formulas for local materials, their annotations passing to later readers in a continuous chain of communal problem-solving. What's striking is how Rome institutionalized this knowledge sharing. The military's engineering corps treated De Architectura as standard issue, ensuring frontier forts in Dacia and Numidia adhered to the same defensive standards as those in Italy. Meanwhile, wealthy patrons funded scriptoria to mass-produce copies, distributing them to provincial libraries where aspiring builders could study them freely. This wasn't just about efficiency, it was cultural engineering. By standardizing techniques empire-wide, Rome ensured a bridge in Gaul would mirror one in Greece, reinforcing the idea of a unified, technologically advanced civilization. But Vitruvius's work had an unexpected side effect: democratization. When Pompeii rebuilt after its 62 CE earthquake, local contractors used pirated copies of De Architectura to imitate Roman concrete techniques despite lacking official permits. In distant Petra, Nabatean stonemasons fused Vitruvian principles with native sandstone carving, creating hybrid styles that thrived outside imperial control. Even Rome's enemies benefited. Historians suspect the Dacians reverse-engineered siege engines after capturing Roman manuals during Trajan's campaigns. The true legacy of these texts lies in their worldview. Rome didn't just build an empire of stone and mortar, it built one of shared knowledge where a single scroll could spawn identical temples on 3 continents. In an age before patents or proprietary software, Vitruvius proved that the most powerful networks aren't made of roads or relays, but of ideas set loose to spread, adapt, and endure. 2,000 years later, his De Architectura still stands not just as a relic, but as a testament to the radical notion that progress belongs to everyone. For all its sophistication, Rome's communication network had cracks no amount of engineering could fully seal. The most glaring, their entire system relied on the one thing our digital age has rendered obsolete: physical movement. No matter how fast their couriers galloped or how precise their signal towers flashed, information couldn't outpace the limits of muscle and wind. A general in Germania might receive word of a rebellion in Judea, but only weeks after the first flames were lit. Unlike today's instant notifications, Rome's internet moved at the speed of horseflesh, leaving commanders to fight yesterday's battles with yesterday's news. And then there was the exclusivity. While we fret over digital divides today, Rome's information highways had literal gatekeepers. The Cursus Publicus wasn't some public postal service. It was a government monopoly, its channels reserved for military dispatches, tax rolls, and imperial decrees. A fishmonger in Ostia couldn't rent a courier to check on his shipment in Alexandria. A farmer in Gaul had no way to protest unfair taxes except through slow, unreliable petitions. Even Rome's vaunted acta diurna, those buzzing news bulletins in the forum, primarily served urban elites. Literacy alone was a barricade. Scrolls meant nothing to the empire's vast illiterate majority, who relied on second-hand retellings, often warped by rumor and time. The system's fragility lurked in its centralized hubs. Sever a few key roads during winter floods, or let bandits overrun a cluster of relay stations, and whole provinces fell dark. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, its ash clouds didn't just bury Pompeii, they choked the roads south of Rome, delaying vital messages for weeks. Compare that to today's internet, where data dynamically reroutes around damage like water finding cracks in rock. Rome had no such redundancy. Their network was only as strong as its weakest cobblestone. Perhaps most telling was the silence from below. While emperors and senators debated in marble halls, the voices of slaves, peasants, and women rarely traveled beyond their villages. No courier carried their stories, no scribe archived their grievances. What little we know of their lives comes from chance graffiti or passing mentions in elite texts, ghostly echoes of a world the system was never built to hear. In the end, Rome's internet was a paradox, revolutionary for its time, yet hopelessly bound by the constraints of an analog world. It could stitch together an empire, but only for those who already held the needle and thread. The true test of any network isn't just how fast it moves information, but who gets to speak, who gets heard, and what gets lost along the way. Rome's communication web wasn't the only ancient system stitching an empire together, but it was uniquely ambitious in its scale and sophistication. Take the Persian Royal Road, stretching over 1,600 miles from Susa to Sardes. While it inspired Rome's highways, it lacked their ubiquity. Persian couriers could famously travel the entire route in 7 days, an impressive feat, but their network was a single ceremonial artery, designed more for imperial pomp than daily governance. Messages traveled fast, but only along one privileged corridor, leaving vast swaths of the empire reliant on slower, ad hoc routes. Rome, by contrast, built a true mesh, 50,000 miles of interconnected roads, ensuring even remote provinces like Britannia or Dacia stayed plugged into the system. The Inca, without wheels or writing, engineered something even more ingenious: the quipu. These knotted cords, strung with precise patterns of color and position, recorded everything from tax quotas to astronomical data. Unlike Roman scrolls, quipus were lightweight, portable, and crucially decipherable across the Andes without a shared language. Runner teams called chasqui relayed them along mountain highways, covering 150 miles a day through the thin air of the Andes. But quipus had a critical limitation: they couldn't convey nuance or narrative. While Rome's scribes debated philosophy in letters, quippers functioned more like spreadsheets, brilliant for logistics, but silent on the messy human stories behind the numbers. China's courier system, developed during the Han Dynasty, rivaled Rome's in efficiency. Post stations dotted the Silk Road, each stocked with fresh horses and relay runners. Like the Cursus Publicus, it prioritized state business, but with an added layer of bureaucratic rigor. Couriers carried bamboo slips notched with arrival and departure times, creating an early version of performance tracking. Yet China's network had a vulnerability Rome avoided: its reliance on paper. Bamboo slips and silk scrolls were fragile compared to Rome's wax tablets and durable papyrus, vulnerable to monsoon rains or desert winds. And while Rome's Latin standardized communication empire-wide, China's vast linguistic diversity meant messages often required translation between provinces, introducing delays and errors. What set Rome apart wasn't just technology, but vision. The Persians built roads to showcase power, the Inca to administer it, and the Chinese to centralize it. Rome's network did all three while adding something radical: the idea that information should flow not just top-down but in all directions. A merchant in Gaul could petition the emperor, a poet in Spain could critique his governor, and a soldier on the Rhine could receive news from home, all through the same channels that moved tax rolls and legionary orders. No other ancient system balanced control and accessibility quite like Rome's, turning cobblestones and scrolls into the ligaments of a civilization that, for centuries, made the Mediterranean feel smaller than it ever had before, or would again until the Internet age. When Rome fell, its roads didn't vanish, they became the blueprint for a quieter, but no less revolutionary, chapter in the story of global communication. Medieval monks, hunched over parchment in candlelit scriptoria, inherited Rome's obsession with networks. Their monasteries functioned like medieval server farms, meticulously copying and preserving knowledge across generations. The Benedictine order alone ran over 37,000 scriptoria by the 12th century, each linked by traveling scholars who carried texts between institutions like living data packets. This wasn't just preservation, it was a distributed backup system for civilization itself, ensuring no single war or fire could erase humanity's collective memory. The parallels go deeper. Just as Rome's Cursus Publicus prioritized imperial decrees, the Church's Cursus Monachorum, a network of monastic couriers, rushed papal bulls and theological rulings across Christendom. Abbots coordinated councils through letters that ricocheted from Cluny to Canterbury, sometimes arriving faster than a king's messenger could cross his own realm. And much like Rome's optical telegraphy, Cistercian monasteries used strategically placed bells to relay simple signals: 3 tolls for a funeral, 5 for an emergency across valleys where roads were too treacherous for riders. But the real heir to Rome's communication genius emerged in the unlikeliest of places: Renaissance banking houses. The Medici family's courier network didn't just move money, it moved market intelligence. Agents in Venice, Bruges, and Constantinople exchanged coded letters with exchange rates and political gossip, giving the Medicis an edge eerily reminiscent of modern high-frequency trading. Their innovation, a Proto-Swift code system, each branch had unique cipher books, allowing them to encrypt loan contracts so thoroughly that even intercepted messages were useless without the key. By the 17th century, Europe's postal systems had institutionalized Rome's legacy. The Thurn und Taxis family's imperial post, endorsed by the Habsburgs, operated relay stations almost identical to Rome's mutations, with fresh horses staged every 20 miles. Their riders could cross the Alps in 5 days, a feat that would have made Julius Caesar nod in approval. Even the terminology echoed antiquity. The French post derived from Rome's posita, the stations where couriers posted their messages. What Rome planted, the Enlightenment wired. Claude Chapp's 18th-century optical telegraph, a line of synchronized semaphore towers, was essentially Polybius's hydraulic telegraph reborn with gears and telescopes. Napoleon used it to coordinate battles across hundreds of miles, just as Roman generals had once relied on shield flashes. And when Morse code crackled across the first telegraph wires in the 1840s, it completed a circle begun 2 millennia earlier. Information finally outpaced flesh and blood, but the logic breaks for relay stations, standardized codes, priority routing remained hauntingly familiar. The thread connecting these eras isn't just technology, it's the unshakable human conviction that distance shouldn't dictate destiny. Whether carved on Roman milestones, inked on monastic scrolls, or pulsed across telegraph wires, the message stays the same. To control the flow of ideas is to shape the world itself. Had Rome not crumbled under its own weight, its communication network might have evolved into something eerily close to our digital age. Picture a world where Roman engineers, already masters of hydraulic power and metallurgy, harnessed steam not just for baths but for mechanical telegraphs. The same aqueducts that fed cities could have driven pistons and gears, turning water into motion to power semaphore towers along the Via Appia. Each tower, manned by a trained telegrapharius, might have used synchronized steam valves to rotate signal arms visible for miles, spelling out messages in a binary code of raised and lowered positions. A dispatch from Britannia could reach Rome not in days but hours. Counterfactual historians love to play with another tantalizing possibility: Rome's famed glassmakers perfecting early optical fibers. Imagine strands of ultra-clear Alexandrian glass, drawn thin as thread and laid in protected clay conduits alongside roads. Light signals, perhaps from oil lamps focused through polished lenses, could theoretically bounce through these fiber lines, carrying coded pulses between major cities. Provincial governors might have received urgent news not by scroll, but by flickering patterns decoded by clerks trained in light-based ciphers. It's a stretch, yes, but no more fantastical than Vitruvius's own designs for siege engines that bordered on steam-powered artillery. Then there's the matter of data storage. Rome's libraries were already proto-data centers. Had they survived, their scrolls might have given way to more advanced media. Some scholars speculate about punched metal plates akin to 19th century Jacquard loom cards recording census data or legal codes in machine-readable patterns. A single plate could replace stacks of fragile papyrus, with mechanical readers tallying population figures or tax obligations by detecting holes aligned in specific columns. The tabularium in Rome might have housed rows of these metallic datasets, maintained by scribes turned data curators. The real game changer, though, would have been standardization. Rome thrived on uniformity: roads, laws, even concrete recipes. A surviving empire might have imposed universal communication protocols, standardized signal codes for naval flags, optical telegraphs, and courier scrolls, ensuring seamless interoperability from Hispania to Syria. Provincial governors could have logged in to centralized bulletin boards, physical spaces where rotating metal panels displayed the latest edicts, market prices, and military updates, synchronized by a master clock in the capital. Of course, this is all speculative fiction, but the underlying truth remains striking. Rome's greatest innovation wasn't any single technology. It was the obsessive drive to shrink distance through systems. Whether by road, relay, or hypothetical steam signal, their goal mirrored our own: to make an impossibly vast world feel instantaneous, searchable, and secure. The internet didn't emerge from a vacuum. It grew from the same human itch that once made a Roman courier tighten his sandals and sprint toward the next Mancio, determined to prove that no empire is truly limited by geography, only by imagination. Rome's rise and fall hold eerie lessons for our hyper-connected world, proving that debates over control, access, and fragility aren't digital age novelties, but ancient struggles wearing new disguises. Consider centralized power. Just as modern governments wrestle with tech giants over data sovereignty, Rome grappled with the same tension. The Cursus Publicus wasn't just infrastructure, it was a weapon of control, letting emperors throttle information flow to rebellious provinces by strategically delaying couriers or censoring dispatches from troublesome governors. Sound familiar? Today's internet shutdowns during protests or algorithmic suppression of dissent follow the same playbook, only firewalls replace fortified checkpoints, and encrypted apps stand in for whispered messages smuggled past watchful centurions. Yet decentralization had its own perils. Rome's early republic thrived on open debate in the forum, much like the internet's early promise of unfiltered exchange. But without moderation, both systems drowned in noise. The Acta Diurna, once a respected news source, devolved into rumor mills where vicious smears spread as fast as facts, poisoning political discourse. Senators complained of alternative facts spun by rivals, while elites hired scribes to flood public spaces with fake bulletins. Substitute papyrus for pixels, and you've got our modern plague of disinformation, proving that viral lies aren't a social media bug. They're a feature of any system where speed outpaces verification. The fragility of networks binds these eras tighter still. Rome's vaunted roads rotted without maintenance, just as today's undersea cables. The internet's own highways remain vulnerable to anchors, sharks, or sabotage. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, it wasn't just Pompeii that suffered. The choking ash severed key routes, isolating provinces for weeks. Modern cloud outages create similar chaos. One severed fiber line in Egypt once slowed traffic across 3 continents, reminding us that for all our tech, we're still building on foundations as fragile as Roman concrete left untended. Perhaps the sharpest lesson lies in exclusion. Rome's communication web served the powerful legions, senators, merchants, while slaves and peasants remained digitally illiterate in every sense. 2,000 years later, billions still lack meaningful internet access, and algorithms invisibly filter what the rest can see. The parallels sting. Whether by scroll or smartphone, information control defines who shapes history and who gets shaped by it. But here's where Rome offers hope as much as warning. Their network endured not through brute force, but adaptivity, incorporating local languages, tolerating unofficial couriers, even co-opting enemy signaling methods after conquest. It's a reminder that resilient systems aren't those that resist change, but those that absorb and evolve. As we wrestle with fake news, cyber attacks, and digital divides, we're not facing unprecedented crises, just ancient ones rewired. The real test isn't whether we'll repeat Rome's mistakes, but whether we'll learn from their hardest-won truth. No empire, virtual or otherwise, survives by controlling information. It survives by letting information, in all its messy democracy, control the empire. The idea of ancient Romans sending emails sounds thrilling, but let's be clear, there's zero evidence of anything resembling digital communication in antiquity. Some pop culture depictions love to blur the lines, suggesting secret codes or proto-technology that simply didn't exist. No, the Romans weren't encoding messages in binary or etching tiny circuits onto wax tablets. The reality is both less flashy and far more impressive. They achieved staggering efficiency using nothing more than ink, sweat, and meticulously organized infrastructure. One persistent myth suggests the Romans had a form of pneumatic tubes, like those used in 19th century offices, to shuttle messages through underground tunnels. This stems from a misunderstanding of their famed aqueducts and sewers, which were engineering marvels but never designed for communication. Another exaggeration paints the Acta Diurna as an ancient Twitter feed with real-time updates buzzing across the empire. In truth, these bulletins were handwritten, took days to copy, and reached most citizens weeks after events occurred. The gap between a senator's speech in Rome and a farmer hearing about it in Gaul could span months, hardly viral by today's standards. Then there's the romanticized notion of Roman encryption, often compared to modern cybersecurity. While they did use basic ciphers like Caesar's famous shift code, these were rudimentary by today's standards. A determined spy could crack them with patience and a sharp stylus. Their real security lay in physical controls, sealed scrolls, trusted couriers, and the sheer difficulty of intercepting a message mid-journey. No high-tech firewalls, just layers of human vigilance. Perhaps the biggest misconception is that Rome's system was universally fast for urgent military dispatches. Absolutely, but a merchant waiting for a reply about a delayed olive shipment could stew for weeks. The Cursus Publicus prioritized state business, leaving private citizens to rely on slower, unreliable networks. Imagine if your internet provider only let government emails through at lightning speed while your personal messages crawled at dial-up pace. The allure of projecting modern tech onto the past is understandable, but it undersells Rome's actual genius. They didn't need gadgets to build a network that rivaled our internet in reach and ambition. Their innovation wasn't in mimicking the future, it was in maxing out the potential of their own era, proving that connectivity isn't about the tools you have, but how relentlessly you use them. So while the Romans never tapped out an email, they did something just as revolutionary. They made an empire of 60 million people feel like a small town where everyone eventually got the memo. Rome's communication web wasn't just impressive, it was visionary. They built a system that shrank an empire spanning 3 continents into something manageable, even intimate. Roads, couriers, signal towers, none of it was digital, yet it achieved something eerily close to what we now call a network. Their proto-internet didn't just move information, it shaped history, binding distant provinces into a cohesive whole with the same relentless efficiency as our modern web binds data packets across fiber optic cables. The speed of their couriers, the precision of their relay stations, the ubiquity of their roads, these weren't just logistical triumphs. They were the scaffolding of an empire that, for centuries, made the Mediterranean feel as interconnected as our online world does today. But here's the tantalizing question. What if Rome had possessed true digital technology? Imagine legions coordinating in real time across Hadrian's Wall and the Euphrates, emperors streaming live decrees to every province, or senators debating crises in a forum that spanned continents instantly. Would the empire have weathered its crises better? Could faster communication have stifled rebellions before they spread, or exposed corruption before it festered? Or would it simply have accelerated the chaos flooding the system with disinformation, overwhelming bureaucracies with instant demands, and turning every provincial grievance into a viral firestorm? The irony is that Rome's greatest strength, its analog network, was also its limit. Their system could dominate a pre-industrial world, but it couldn't outpace the human frailties that doomed all empires: greed, ambition, the relentless tug of time and distance. The internet didn't solve those problems for us, it just gave them new velocity. So as we tap our screens and marvel at the speed of our modern connections, let's spare a thought for the couriers who once raced down cobbled highways, their sandals kicking up dust as they carried the whispers of an empire that refused to be silenced by geography. Rome's legacy isn't just in the ruins they left behind, it's in the undeniable truth they proved, that communication in any era isn't about the wires or the wax tablets. It's about the unshakable human drive to connect, control, and conquer the spaces between us. Now it's your turn. Do you think Rome would have endured longer with a true internet? Or would faster communication have hastened its collapse? Drop your thoughts below, and if you loved unraveling this ancient mystery with us, don't forget to subscribe. Who knows what historical puzzles we'll decode